Alright, in this video we're going to look to how to correctly write a lab report. Okay, so I'm going to basically just work through this paper that you have on the front side where it goes through all the different parts of the lab report, and then I will show you the back side of the paper, which is kind of a sample lab grading rubric sheet that I have. Okay, so first thing you got to know is the lab report has the following sections. Okay, they're all in bold here. Alright, you have your title and name, you have a purpose, you have some pre-lab questions, then you have your data, you have your post-lab questions, and then finally you have a conclusion or a summary. Alright, it has to be typed, okay, or by typed I also kind of mean handwritten. If you do it in Notability, that's fine. Alright, I just have to be able to read it. Okay, it can't be on a piece of paper basically. You turn it in via Shobi, and you got to put it in the appropriate folder in Shobi like you've been doing before. Okay. Again, it can be in Pages, it can be in Notability. I personally think Notability is a little bit easier. It's easier to show work for your math problems. You can also do tables fairly easily in Notability with the inserting a figure. Okay. It's very easy to also add your lab report to the bottom of your lab handout. So if you take the lab handout off of Moodle, put it into Notability so it has all the instructions, all the procedure, everything you're supposed to do. At the end of my typed handout, you can then put your lab report at the bottom, and it's real easy. Then all you have to do is kind of scroll up and down the screen. So you have to be sure to start a fresh page so you can easily see where your lab report starts and where the handout ends. I've had a lot of them in the past year that they were kind of muddled, or they'd start one place and then end the other, or say see my lab handout. I don't do see lab handout. Okay, you have to start your lab report, and that's what I look at. I don't look at anything prior to that. Okay, so when you open one in Notability, then you have the lab handout, and then you start your lab report after it. Okay, you start with the title and name. All right, it's just got to have the title of the lab and your name. It's easy as that. You should have your lab partner's name as well. Would be nice in there. Usually I can tell, but it is also nice to have your lab partner's name on there. You then have to have your purpose. Okay, so for a well-designed experiment, this is a single sentence. Some require 2 or 3. But if you go beyond this, you probably miss the point of the experiment. Normally, I put the purpose right on the lab report, and you don't have to worry even about what it looks like, or what it is, or how to rewrite it. Okay. Then you'll do your pre-lab questions. All right. Some have pre-lab questions, some don't. If they don't have any, you just skip it. All right. So you do basically those things. Read through your procedure of your lab, and then you take your pre-lab quiz. Okay. And then after you take your pre-lab quiz, you start taking data. Alright, so when you see that you have a lab report you have to write, you open the lab handout, you put it in Notability, you read the purpose, you read the procedure, you do the purpose for your lab report, you do any pre-lab questions you have to do, then you take your pre-lab quiz. Okay, oftentimes I don't have enough time to grade those, so I'll let you just go ahead and take your quiz and then start the lab. Okay, you don't have to retake pre-lab quizzes. They're usually only 3 or 4 questions. They're usually very short, okay, and to the point. After then, you take your data, okay? So you go ahead, you do your lab, you get your data, all right? You record anything on your lab handout, okay? You can eventually put it on your lab report in a nice table if you want to, or you can put it right in a nice table or something to begin with, okay? It needs to be clearly labeled. It needs to be put into your lab report, okay? You can't just say see lab handout like I said. I'd also like you this year to take a photo of your final results and put it in your data section. So if your final result was to see some reaction, then take a picture of the beaker that the reaction was in. Okay. Let me know that you're done, and then I kind of mark your name down. I kind of keep track of who's done with the experiment and who's not. It helps me to kind of keep an eye on people who are using somebody else's lab data when they're not supposed to. So do all your data, get your lab done, take a picture of it, tell me, and you're good. It's all you really have to do in class is the actual lab. Okay. Then you get done with the lab. Okay. You start working on your post-lab questions. Okay. Usually I'll put post-lab questions in the lab handout. You answer each question. Okay. If there's any work, make sure you show your work. I don't just take answers if there's math supposed to be in there. All right. I use your number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and you answer the question. You show your work. Okay. The last section is probably the most important section of the lab. In fact, it is the most important section of the lab, and it's often the most poorly written section of the lab. Okay, this should be a short paragraph summarizing what happened in your experiment. Okay, it shouldn't be 2 sentences. It should be a short paragraph. Okay, and the following things need to be in there. You need to have a restatement of your purpose and your final results. So if your purpose of your lab report was to determine the density of aluminum, you need to tell me the purpose of this lab report, or purpose of this lab experiment was to determine the density of aluminum. We found the density of aluminum to be 3.42 grams per milliliter. Okay, you have to then tell me what you got. I look for it and say, okay, here's the purpose. Did they explain then that they completed their purpose? Okay, so make sure your purpose was complete. If it was to analyze different chemical reaction types, then comment on the types of reactions you saw. Okay, so many people just say the purpose of this lab was to do this, and then they don't talk anything else about that or say what their numbers were. You've got to tell me what you found out. Okay. It also needs to be a summary of your lab experiment, like I said. So I don't need a step-by-step of the lab. I just need a short summary paragraph of what went on. Okay. Mention what type of reaction occurred. Mention what you did. Okay. We started off this lab. We were using a beaker to mix these two chemicals together. Name your chemicals, then say what you saw, and then you're done. I don't have to know exactly how much you added of stuff. I just need to know a roundabout summary of what you put together. Okay. And the last thing is an analysis of any sources of error. Don't just say you measured poorly. Why did you measure poorly? What did it do to your results? What could you do better next time? Okay, you can't just say I rounded wrong. For some reason, that is like the most common error thing people want to say. There's no way rounding is going to throw your answer off so far to give you a 80% error. Okay, the higher the percentage, the worse you did, basically. We'll talk about that this year. So analyze what went wrong. Okay, if you think everything went well in the sense that you were supposed to see this reaction and you saw the reaction, then you're good. If you try and tell me that you had a 50% error but everything went great, I'm probably going to circle it and say, no, that's not right. You can't have that kind of error be half wrong and tell me everything was just peachy. Okay, so that's your conclusion or your summary. It's the most important part. It's 10 usually points or so of the entire lab report, okay, which is a good chunk of it. It kind of depends on the lab. And you'll see on your rubric, that's kind of what I look through is, your error, your summary, your purpose, and anything else vital in your lab or your post-lab questions. Now, don't just take your post-lab questions and copy and paste them down there. It doesn't work that way. You can't do that. Okay, it's got to be rewritten. It's got to flow as a nice paragraph. Okay. And then you legally sign it and date it. You always do that for lab reports. Just pick a cursive font. Or if you're a Notability, just sign it. Okay. Do not copy your lab partner's lab write-up, all right? It can be very similar, but it cannot be word for word. So when I look at a lab report, your data should be the same, okay? But I should not see the same color, okay, in the sense that you have the exact same handwriting when I know it's not your handwriting. You shouldn't have a copy and pasted table. You can write it yourself, okay? And you should have a different conclusion. That means significantly different, all right? Use your own little brain. Maybe talk about what you want to put in it. What did you kind of put in yours? But I should not see the exact same sentence structure, one following on the other. And all you did was change the word observe to analyze. Okay, I've seen it before. Please do not do that. That is not going to get you very many points, if any at all. And if I see it a lot, I'm going to have a talk with you, or we're going to talk about this is not acceptable. You need to write your own. Okay, so I know it's easy to email one another stuff, but you can't do that, all right? You need to write it yourself, okay? So this is kind of then this overall for your lab report, okay? You'll get one of these lab report rubric sheets, all right? Each one's a little bit different because usually what I put in the post-lab question section is kind of like each question and how many points each one is kind of worth. You get a certain amount of points for having just your pre-lab questions and your data there. You get a certain amount of points for being organized correctly, all right? So if I can't read it, that's some of the points, okay? But again, the main section is your post-lab questions and your conclusion, okay? So again, this is how to write your lab report, okay? We'll go through this together on our first one here for this chapter, and then we'll also do them throughout the year. Usually 1 or 2 per chapter. Not every single lab has a lab report.